Namaste. So in our last episode, Samvarta is speaking to Parashuram from the Ajata platform, the highest platform of self-realization. And Parashuram, his mind is blown. Samvarta says, you asked me who I am? Listen to this. If you have understood the word tvam, your question is useless, like grinding flour. If you have not understood the meaning of the word tvam, then again that phrase is useless. Like, if you understand that you is non-different from me, I, then there's no point in asking, who are you? You already know. And if you don't know that the you and the I point to the same thing, not really a thing, but anyway, just to use conventional language, then again, your question is useless, because then there's no way that you can know. If you and I are separate individuals, then you can never understand me, I can never understand you. But if you and I are actually different expressions of the same consciousness, the same Brahman, then we already understand, so there's no need for the question. It's like grinding flour. Flour is already ground. Well, what's the use? So then he goes on. If you have understood that through somebody, then tell me that. In other words, we're all born into this world, actually self-realized. But then what happens? We start listening to people's stories. And they're telling us this story that you are an individual. This is your name. This is your family. This is your country. This is this is that. And they go on telling you these stories. And since in your little innocent baby body, you feel that you are dependent on these people for your survival, you take it quite seriously. You believe it, even though it contradicts your direct perception. As I've stated here so many times, the whole world disappears every night when you go to sleep. So how can you think that it's real? How can you think these divisions between you and I and him and them and us and the other guys and all of this, how can you think that's a fact? If you realize that this world is a dream, then you don't take it too seriously. So most of us learn what is what by listening to the stories that other people tell us. And of course, they mislead us because of their own desires and so forth, attachments and ignorance and whatever. But then they pass their ignorance on to us. So, if you have heard this understanding through somebody else, then Samvarta says, well, that's understandable. But you have not cognized the conscious self. Why? Because, he says, it is not cognizable. So, the conscious self is not cognizable. What does that mean? It's impossible to make a symbol, a picture, an idea of it. Because it is not divisible. It cannot be divided. You cannot put a boundary on it and say, this is the conscious self and this is not the conscious self. Well, you can, but it's going to be an illusion. It's going to be Maya. It's going to be ignorance and falsehood and lead you astray. So that is what everybody in the world is doing, isn't it? Saying, I am I and you are you and never the twain shall meet. But in actual fact, they are one and the same being, simply expressing through different media, that's all. Different radios, huh? Tuned to apparently different stations. But in all cases, the radio waves are the same. So try to understand. Consciousness, or more properly, awareness, is the same in all beings. And it simply changes according to its objects, like a mirror that reflects different colored objects placed before it. That's all. Once you understand that, then you'll be like Samvarta, liberated soul. He continues, you have seen the physical body. There is no doubt in that. Because your inquiry is well based on appellation. In other words, he's calling him you, tvam. Huh? Okay, so you've seen there's this physical body. Now you're calling that body you. You see? This idea, this concept of individuality and separation is all based on names. I and you, him and them. Huh? This person, that person, blah, 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 blah. It's all names. If we become silent, as Ramana Maharshi recommends, and just observe everything without thinking about it, but just observing. Huh? Actually, the Buddha talks about this in the Mulapariyaya Sutta. He talks about the root of the mind, Mulapariyaya. That when a perception first comes into the mind, it's fresh, it's clean, it's natural, it's existential. Huh? But then we immediately project something on it. And that something is this feeling of I as opposed to you. Huh? And so we color it. It's like putting on, colored specs and seeing the world in a different way. But the world as it is cannot be bounded into I and you and all that. Huh? Think about it for a minute. Just in terms of the body, okay? The body cannot exist without air, water, food, a place to live. Huh? And let's just look at the air for a minute. The air is coming ultimately from the sun. And it's also is generated, oxygen is generated by the plants and so on. The plants are fertilized by the insects. The insects feed the birds. The birds are making beautiful sounds. Actually, we cannot live, we cannot exist without the whole world. Because the world exists, we exist. And we cannot live without it. If we were suddenly transported to outer space, we would die within seconds. We need, and actually we are the whole world. And the closer you look, the less clear the boundary between the self and others appears. So we could give hundreds of examples. I don't want to make this too long. So in other words, I am everything around me, especially everything I am conscious of. My body, my mind, my senses, the sense perceptions of my environment, and all these elements and other life forms and so on, my mother, my father, all these are necessary for me to exist. So can I really say that I am different? Can I really say that I'm an individual separate from all others? See, it doesn't hold together if you really look into it. And most people don't look into it. They just believe the stories they're told and use the convenient, accepted, ordinary language for it. But actually, it's a lie. It's an illusion, a dream. Try to understand. Samvarta understands. Michael McClure understands. And some other people here and there. But most people don't get it. And even if they pretend to get it, even if they talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. But Samvarta is the real thing. And he goes on. Thus you know what is sensory through its designation, its name, its label. You have not known that which is not self-revealing and severally imagined. See, the self is not exactly self-revealing until you look into it. Then it is. But it's imagined as different things by different people. If you talk to different religious people, like a Christian and a Muslim and a Hindu and a Jain and a Buddhist, they'll all tell you different things about what the self is. But is the self actually different? No. No. Self is the same in all of them. They're simply using different labels, different designations, different names, as he says here. You know what is sensory through its designation. Or like the Buddha described in the Mulaparayaya Sutta, when a perception is originally encountered, it's just neutral. It is what it is. But then we add these layers of designations on top of it. See, if I see something, then I say, oh, I am seeing. And this is mine. This is my house. See, I'm seeing the wall. This is my camera. This is my lion. Oh, well, lions. Actually, none of this is mine, but all of this is me. Try to understand. This is the Ajata platform. And he goes on. The consciousness, is not confined to a single space because of its association with the body. We imagine that it is. But then what happens when we go to sleep at night and we have dreams? We find ourselves in a different body, in a different space, where all kinds of crazy things can happen that could never happen in waking consciousness. But waking consciousness is also a dream because it passes away. It disappears when we go to sleep. Just waking consciousness seems to be a more solid thing, a more real thing, because it's more persistent. You wake up in the morning in the same house, in the same bed, in the same body. But in dreams, you never know. Anything can happen. And does. And then he says, therefore, O Rama, I will answer you if you ask your doubt clearly. In other words, first you have to admit that you have a doubt, that you're confused, that you don't know. The problem in speaking with most people about these subjects is that they think they already know. But as Samvarta said earlier, the self is inconceivable. It cannot be known in the sense that we think we know most things. It cannot be perceived by the senses or the mind. It cannot be labeled because it has no boundary. How do you say this is the self and this is and this is not the self? You can't say, because the self is everything. The self is everywhere. So there's no way that you can label it. Yes, we make up names like the self, the soul, Atma, or Nirvana, or Samadhi, or so many things. But really, these things are very different from their names. We throw their names around using ordinary language as if they were objects that could be separated and counted and, put on a shelf or whatever. But they're not like that. The self is always subjective. Self is never an object. You cannot see the self. You can only be the self. And this is what Samvarta is trying to get across to poor Parashuram, whose mind is completely blown at this point. Om Tat Sat. Om Harihi Om.